I can honestly tell you, I've had a lot of experience with meteorologists in the field, and there are very few people in meteorology that know as much about how the atmosphere and the oceans work as Dr. Bill here. He mentioned something that was very important, observations versus models. So that's the big thing. Most people that are meteorologists now either believe that models have all the answers, and then there are people who actually like to look at the real data. He's been looking at real data. He's a hurricane forecasting expert. Nobody knows more than he does, so it's just been great to be able to do stuff with him. I'm going to try to make my part brief because it's warm in here. And I know tables and graphs sometimes put me to sleep. But I wrote down a few things. I think one of the most important things about this global warming issue that's more important than the global warming issue is just think about all the things that go on in the world that you have people that tell you that this is what it is. This is the way it works. And you end up believing them. And you believe them, you don't have the time to get on the internet, you don't have the time to go to the library to actually investigate these issues. What I think is really important about the global warming issue is how many other issues do we have out there where people are like sheep. They're told by their politician, Republican or Democrat, that this is the way it is, when in fact it's not that way. And you go on faith. And what scares me is that there are a lot of issues that really need to be looked at deeply. This is one that I've had some time to look at, and I always tell people that I run into, I'm not a climate expert. However, I've been in meteorology for a while. It's probably safe to assume I know a little bit more than the average person about weather and climate. But that's something that I'm interested in. So I have an education, I've taken some time to take a look at this issue, and I go, I can't believe all the information out there that's just not correct. It's not scientifically correct. So that's the thing. What about how many other issues do we have in science alone that we're being led to believe are truths when they're not? So that's what's scary to me, not just global warming, but other issues. Before I forget to mention this, at the end of Bill's part of the talk, he talked about the economics of global warming. There's a really, really good video that you can get on Netflix. The title of it is Cool It, and it's by the ex-head of Greenpeace, oddly enough. And also, oddly enough, this gentleman, I wish I should have written his name down, he's from Denmark. He mentions in this movie that he actually believes that global warming is man-made and is happening. But what's really great about this movie is that he actually talks about how much money it would cost to sequester carbon dioxide, CO2. There are efforts to try to capture carbon dioxide production from energy production and how much money this is going to cost. And in his movie, he talks about the billions of dollars that would be spent to sequester CO2 and all the other much more important environmental problems that the Earth faces, and where we need to be putting our money into those problems and not this one that we really can't do anything about. Even, I'm going to say, let's say I believe in global warming and I think we're going to melt and, okay, we better start cutting back on production of CO2. Do you really think the rest of the world, China, India, developing countries are going to do this? The developing countries, they're not going to do it. And why should they? They have the same rights. I believe they should have the same rights that we had, which was to develop, become prosperous, and lead a modern life. By telling them that they can't use fuels that are still available is really telling them that they're going to be in poverty and people are going to die. All right, so this is really a humanitarian effort. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about renewable energy, and then I'll get back to a little bit of the science here. I was just writing this down as these points as Bill was talking. Renewable energy, I'm all for. Maybe I'm perhaps a little bit different than Bill. I think we should develop renewables where we can. I think we're going to have to The world is eventually going to run out of carbon-based fuels. We're going to have to do something. However, does one honestly believe that we can generate enough electricity from solar and wind for our cities? You might be able to put solar farms together. You might be able to have solar on your roof. You might be able to have wind in your backyard. But what happens when the sun doesn't shine? What happens when the wind doesn't blow? All right, we need to develop much more sophisticated battery technologies. But that's many years away. So my feeling is that we need to use our carbon-based fuels while we still have them, and let those fuels help us develop these new technologies, rather than give up and start shutting down coal plants and start doing all the things that you hear about, these scary things. I don't understand all these people that are all for these renewables. I'm wondering how they're going to be heating their homes. And what my experience has been is most of these people that they talk a big game about being environmental, and they're usually the last people. The example that I use is driving around in Boulder. A hippie VW van says, you know, all this green stuff on there, environment first and all that, and these people are throwing Wendy's trash bags out the window. I mean, I've seen it, so. Okay, so I guess I should get back. How do I get to the next slide?
Hit that right button.
Okay. There's another component to this global warming thing that a lot of people don't even think about, which is you'll hear on the news people go, such and such study shows that the world's average temperature has gone up 2 degrees, you know, or is much warmer than it's ever been, and blah, blah, blah. Well, as it turns out, measuring temperature accurately around the globe is a major problem. Everybody just assumes that the thermometer in Uzbekistan or the thermometer in Vietnam is properly shielded, properly sheltered, properly sighted. A lot of the instruments around the world just simply aren't all that accurate. I've learned a lot by just having my home weather station. It took me forever to be able to get an accurate temperature reading on a day where we have bright sunshine and low winds. My thermometer would read 101 and 102, and the actual temperature was only about 96 or 97. It's really difficult. Dennis just got a weather station, and he's having problems with his. It's really, it's very, very difficult to measure temperatures, especially when it's warm out. And this includes...
It's difficult when they're cheap equipment.
Well, yeah, but even with good equipment. I remember a paper that came out in the year 2005 about temperature readings at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Tucson, Arizona. They were breaking all sorts of high temperature records. Well, what they discovered was the instrument wasn't properly aspirated. All right, there are tons of studies like that, and there's this interesting gentleman. I don't know if anybody can see back there, but you might want to write this down. This is fun stuff to look at. His name is Anthony Watts, and he runs a website called surfacestations.org. And I can't possibly tell you all the stuff that he's done, but I'll just give you an example of two. He's gone around and taken a look at the U.S. Historical Climatological Network. We consider ourselves to be like we have the best data in the world, right? We're the United States. We do everything better than everybody else. Well, you wouldn't believe the problems that this guy has found in our data network. This is just one example, and you could accuse me of cherry picking. As it turns out, this problem is pretty pervasive, not everywhere, but more than you might think. This is an example of one of the stations that's in that network. I don't know how many of you can actually see this thing, but they've got the shelter for the instruments right next to a building. Well, that building's putting off heat, okay? That's going to influence the temperature record. There's an asphalt parking lot here. The actual requirements for setting up weather instruments are pretty strict. Even, I mean, these requirements go back to the 1880s. And as time goes on now, what's happening is a lot of our forecast offices have relocated. Instruments used to be at airports. They're now located at universities in a lot of cases. They're located downtown. The climatological record for even our most reliable stations has changed. A perfect example is what goes on at Denver International Airport. Denver International Airport may as well be Kansas compared to the old Stapleton Field. Okay, Denver International Airport gets much warmer during the day because it's out on the prairie. And at night it gets much cooler because it's away from the urban heat island effect. The urban heat island effect is also a contributor, in my opinion, to some of this global warming that we've seen. The urban heat island effect basically is this idea that when you're taking temperature measurements, we have more concrete and asphalt and buildings, the temperature is going to be warmer than when you're out in the middle of nowhere. Well, what's been going on around the world and in the United States? We've got more urbanization going on. So it's only natural that a lot of our temperatures in the big cities are going up. Some of this temperature increase is probably an increase in temperature that Dr. Gray talked about. But some of it's also this urban heat island effect. And some of it is our instruments have now become automated. National Weather Service instruments, which used to be considered the most reliable, are now totally automated. There's no human in the picture. A great example of this is what's going on in Longmont. They just put, the National Weather Service just put, or the FAA just put an instrument in Longmont. It was doing great. Now, if you take a look at the temperatures in Longmont, they're 4 or 5 or 6 degrees warmer than everybody else. You think that's really going on? No. They have a problem in Longmont. You try calling them up and telling them, and they go, yeah, we'll fix it. They don't do anything. This is another example here of shelter next to air conditioning unit. You know, I don't want to push this point too much, but this guy's done extensive work and looking at hundreds of stations in the network, and he's found all sorts of problems. And I just wanted to put this slide up to show you one of the new papers that he's written. The title here is New Study Shows Half of the Global Warming in the USA is Artificial. And what he means by artificial is problems with instruments, sighting problems, instrument error, all sorts of things. So I suggest to you that, yeah, it might be getting warmer, but some of this warming has nothing to do with what's going on in nature or what man is doing. And I think...
Quick question.
Yeah.
Can you cancel out this with atmospheric measurements?
Yeah, if you read the stuff that he's doing, they do what are called bias adjustments. They actually will go and take a look at the 30-year record or 50-year record of a station, and they then try to find out what the bias was, whether it's cool or warm, and then they adjust that bias. But when you do that, you end up playing games, okay? That's artificial to a large degree because you have to do this bias. This bias filtering is not an exact science, okay? So it might take away some of these problems, but not all of them.
Because you're biasing against a skewed ground temperature, and that skewed ground temperature is affecting your atmospheric temperature. So the whole system gets biased.
The question is for some of these instruments that are known to be bad, can one take a look at the record and fix the record? We call that bias removal. Remove what we are known as problems and then recompute these averages. Oh, and speaking of averages, here's a really important one. I mentioned that world temperature average that is used to propagate this global warming nonsense. When the Soviet Union went under, so did several hundred of their stations, and a lot of them were in Siberia. Those are no longer used in the computation of the world average temperature. Does anybody tell you that? Do you think that has an effect on the temperature? So, okay, I think we probably need to wrap this open it up for questions. I just want to end with, this is an extremely complex problem. The science is very, very complex, and I'll leave you with this. I'm surprised Dr. Gray would have mentioned it.
Gary, there's a few more slides. Why don't you go through them? Go ahead.
Well, you already mentioned you already mentioned this one. I just wanted to say, let me say something about the oceans here. You might ask the question that you all might want to ask is, okay, the Earth, I think everybody agrees the Earth has warmed some, especially since about 1970. That's sort of an accepted fact. We all agree on that. So if it's not human caused, then what is causing it? What are the natural climate drivers? And this could be something that Dr. Gray could talk about for an hour or two. And I'm just going to leave you with a very, very simple concept here. The Earth is covered by, anybody want to give me a percentage of how much of the Earth is covered by water? 70%, 80%? Don't you think the oceans have something to do with what goes on in the atmosphere? There's an interaction between the oceans and the atmosphere. We've all bought into, how many of you have heard the expression El Nino and La Nina? These are temperature changes in the eastern Pacific that are known to affect atmospheric circulation patterns as far away as the United States and Europe. Well, if you believe that the oceans can affect the climate on a seasonal scale, isn't it possible that there are deep ocean water circulations that go on a scale of maybe 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years that affect what goes on in the atmosphere? So I'm not going to try to educate you about that. Anybody that's interested in that, go Google the thermohalion circulation or ask Dr. Gray to explain it to you. But just think of it this way. It's very, very complicated science. And to think that there's one thing, there's a simple one-to-one correspondence between carbon dioxide and the climate. And you don't need anything else to explain what we would call explain the variance. The global warming folks are very, very simple. They go, the carbon dioxide explains 80 or 90% of the variance of what's going on. You know, they're statistically responsible for 80 to 90% of this warming. Or I think some of them think it's 100%. When in fact, there are probably hundreds of natural processes that go on. I keep saying I'm going to have one more thing and one more thing. One more thing. The carbon cycle is never mentioned here. Everybody assumes that when carbon is put into the atmosphere, it stays there forever. And we're going to warm and we're going to be all destroyed. Well, the carbon cycle is also a very complicated subject. The carbon cycle is just that. Carbon goes in the atmosphere, it rains out as calcium carbonate. Okay, the oceans absorb and emit CO2 depending upon their temperature. But I'll just leave you with this. The oceans are the main driver of our climate. It just has to be. It has to be. Now there are other competing mechanisms. Some people think it's changes in the amount of solar radiation we get from the sun. Some people think it could be the sunspot cycles. Some people think it could be the tilt of the Earth's atmosphere. There are lots of different possible natural things that go on. But just understand this, it's just very, very complicated.
Jerry, there's a few more slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We have to leave you with, if you want, if we haven't talked you into taking a look into this more on your own. This is a list of sites where you can get a different opinion of global warming, not just what you hear in the news media. This was mentioned earlier, and I just want to say 2 seconds. I know I keep saying this is my 15th last thing. No one ever talks about the benefits of global warming. There are some benefits. Talk to the people in Canada where they can now grow crops in certain places where they weren't able to. Yes, of course there are disadvantages, and deserts are growing in certain places, but there's a flip side to warming as well as a downside to it. And this, Dr. Gray mentioned this. Oh yeah, this was that book, this new book I haven't seen it yet. Speaking of books, I brought about 4 or 5 books. If anybody wants just to take a look at what I brought with me. But there's actually a ton of material out there. You would never know it, if you turn on the TV.
One more.
And there's that site that Dr. Gray was talking about, HTTP tropical.atmos, ATMOS.Colorado State or colostate.edu. And you all have been absolutely wonderful. Thanks for listening.